Stonehenge has been sitting on a windswept chalk plain in southern England, refusing to fully explain itself. Every generation of researchers has approached it with new tools, new theories, and new confidence that this time, finally, the mystery would yield. And every generation has walked away with something remarkable and something still unexplained. But in the past 2 years, a series of discoveries has landed in rapid succession, each one overturning something that had been considered settled for decades, and each one raising questions that no existing framework has yet been able to answer. The stone at the very heart of Stonehenge is not from where anyone thought it was. The century-old debate about how the monument stones arrived has been resolved in a way that forces a complete reassessment of what Neolithic people were capable of. And the closer researchers look, the more the monument seems to describe a level of social organization and long-distance connectivity that the textbooks have consistently underestimated. Start with the stone that sits at the center of everything. Lying flat at the heart of Stonehenge, the 6-ton, 5-meter-long rectangular altar stone is a gray-green sandstone, far bigger and different in its composition from the other bluestones. Its function is unknown. The name was suggested by the architect Inigo Jones in 1620. Nobody knows if it was ever actually used as an altar. For the past 100 years, the consensus was that it came from Wales, like the smaller bluestones arranged in the monument's inner horseshoe. That consensus turned out to be wrong. Animals 24-7. In August 2024, a paper published in the journal Nature announced one of the most genuinely startling results in the history of Stonehenge research. A new study analyzed the age and chemistry of minerals from fragments of the altar stone and found a remarkable similarity between the old red sandstone of the Arcadian Basin in northeast Scotland and the Stonehenge altar stone. The Arcadian Basin is in the very north of Scotland, covering the island of Orkney, parts of the Shetland Islands, and the northernmost tip of the Scottish mainland. YouTube. The lead author of the study was Anthony Clark, a PhD student at Curtin University in Perth, Australia, who grew up in southwest Wales, the region that had previously been assumed to be the source of the altar stone. Clark's approach involved examining the age and chemical characteristics of each of the mineral grains that came together to form the sandstone. When you take this profile, this fingerprint in a way, of the rock, we can forensically compare it to potential source areas all over the UK, he explained. And when we did that, it was strikingly similar to Arcadian Basin sedimentary rocks. When he first saw the data, his reaction was disbelief. When we first got the first kind of batch of data, I looked at it and I said, there's no way that this can be so distinctly Scottish. YouTube. But the data held up under every test the team could apply, with quite a high degree of statistical certainty, bigger than 95% confidence. The researchers were able to associate the age profile of the altar stone's mineral grains to the Arcadian Basin in northeast Scotland. The specific reason why this material was transported, we can't really answer that directly, said Professor Chris Kirkland, a co-author of the study at Curtin University. All we know is that a 6.5-ton piece of rock that's come from 750 kilometers away. That, by itself, tells us an awful lot about Neolithic society and its connectivity. Texas Department of Agriculture. Co-author Dr. Robert Ixer from UCL's Institute of Archaeology described the finding directly. This is a genuinely shocking result, but if plate tectonics and atomic physics are correct, then the altar stone is Scottish. The work prompts 2 important questions. Why and exactly how was the altar stone transported from the very north of Scotland, a distance of more than 700 kilometers, to Stonehenge? YouTube. The distance involved rewrites the scale of what was previously understood. The altar stone has traveled a remarkably long way, a straight-line distance of at least 700 kilometers. This is the longest known journey for any stone used in a Neolithic monument. To put that in context, the massive sarsen stones that form the outer ring of Stonehenge came from roughly 25 kilometers away. The bluestones, which had previously been considered the remarkable long-distance travelers of the monument, came from Wales, about 225 kilometers. The altar stone traveled more than 3 times further than that, from a region that would have required crossing the full length of Britain. Animals 24-7. The question of how it made that journey opened a separate investigation entirely. Researchers combined mineral grain dating with ice sheet modeling to test whether glaciers could have carried the stone south during the last ice age. Their modeling showed glaciers may have transported rocks part of the way, potentially as far as Dogger Bank in the North Sea, but not into southern England, meaning the stone would still have needed to be moved hundreds of kilometers by people. The research indicates there were no viable glacial pathways linking the source region directly to Stonehenge, co-lead author Clark said, reinforcing the conclusion that human transport was required. Beef Magazine. That conclusion was confirmed by a second study, published in January 2026 in the journal Communications, Earth and Environment, which approached the question from an entirely different direction. Using advanced mineral fingerprinting techniques, Curtin scientists examined microscopic grains preserved in rivers close to Stonehenge around Salisbury Plain. The mineral grains act as geological time capsules, revealing how sediments traveled across Britain over millions of years. The research team analyzed more than 500 zircon crystals, one of the most durable minerals on Earth. Texas Farm Bureau. The results showed no evidence that glaciers ever reached the Stonehenge site. If glaciers had carried rocks all the way from Scotland or Wales to Stonehenge, they would have left a clear mineral signature on the Salisbury Plain, Clark said. Those rocks would have eroded over time, releasing tiny grains that we could date to understand their ages and where they came from. We looked at the river sands near Stonehenge for some of those grains the glaciers might have carried, and we did not find any. That makes the alternative explanation, that humans moved the stones, far more plausible. Texas Farm Bureau. The glacial transport theory had provided a convenient explanation for one of archaeology's most persistent puzzles. If ice had done the heavy lifting, then Neolithic people simply needed to collect stones that nature had already delivered close to their building site. Now that explanation has been scientifically eliminated. Humans, not glaciers, transported Stonehenge's megaliths across Great Britain to their current location in southern England. And that conclusion forces a reckoning with what that actually means about the people who built this monument. Texas Association of Counties. The findings point to the existence of unexpectedly advanced transport methods and societal organization at the time of the altar stone's arrival at its current location in southern England, around 2600 BC. Professor Kirkland said, transporting such massive cargo overland from Scotland to southern England would have been extremely challenging, indicating a likely marine shipping route along the coast of Britain. This implies long-distance trade networks and a higher level of societal organization than is widely understood to have existed during the Neolithic period in Britain. YouTube. Think about what that marine route would have required. A 6.5-ton sandstone block loaded onto some form of vessel capable of carrying it, navigating along the coastline of Scotland, down the eastern coast of England, and somehow transported inland to the Salisbury Plain. Nobody knows exactly how this was accomplished. Nobody knows what kind of vessel could have carried that weight. Nobody knows how long the journey took, or how many people were involved, or how many communities along the route contributed to the effort. It is possible the megalith was used in other stone circles or monuments along the way, as one archaeologist suggested. You can imagine that maybe that stone has had a very long circuitous route over perhaps a period of 100+ years before ending up at Stonehenge. YouTube. That detail. The possibility that the altar stone spent generations in transit, perhaps incorporated into other monuments, perhaps considered sacred in its own right long before it reached Salisbury Plain, opens a picture of Neolithic Britain that is almost impossible to fully imagine. Not a collection of isolated communities scraping a subsistence existence on the margins of the ancient world, but a network of connected peoples capable of coordinating effort across hundreds of miles and across generations. A Scottish origin for the altar stone highlights an intriguing architectural link noted by archaeologist Joshua Pollard of the University of Southampton. Unlike other stones at Stonehenge, the altar stone lies on its side, a detail seen in some stone circles in Scotland. A region of Scotland called Aberdeenshire contains up to 99 recorded examples of recumbent stone circles, where a large stone is laid flat in a similar manner. The possibility that the people who built Stonehenge were following a tradition that had its roots in Scottish megalithic culture, and that the altar stone was itself a statement of that connection, gives the monument's design an entirely new layer of meaning. Texas Association of Counties. A Scottish source for the altar stone adds to evidence that increasingly points to long-distance connections, including shared pottery styles and house plans, among late Neolithic groups that inhabited the British Isles during Stonehenge's construction phases, says archaeologist Alastair Whittle of Cardiff University in Wales. The monument, in other words, may have been built by people who understood themselves as part of something much larger than any single community or region, people who shared knowledge, shared materials, and shared a vision across distances that would challenge modern logistics, let alone those of 5,000 years ago. Texas Association of Counties. And the findings continue to arrive. The researchers suspect the altar stone was moved by Neolithic communities in stages, hauling the rock over land for some parts of the journey and shipping it by boat, either on rivers or along the coast for others. Exactly how those stages unfolded, what vessels were used, what routes were taken, and what knowledge of navigation and seamanship the builders possessed are all questions that remain open. Congressional Sportsman's Foundation. What is no longer open is the question of whether people did it. The science is now clear on that point. We looked at the river sands near Stonehenge for some of those grains the glaciers might have carried, and we did not find any. That makes the alternative explanation, that humans moved the stones, far more plausible, Clark said. While the study points strongly toward human transport, exactly how people moved the stones is still unknown. Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. There's something almost vertiginous about the scale of what these studies collectively reveal. Stonehenge has stood for 5,000 years. Researchers have been studying it systematically for centuries. And in the space of roughly 18 months, beginning with that August 2024 paper in Nature and continuing through the January 2026 paper in Communications, Earth and Environment, two foundational assumptions about the monument have been overturned. The altar stone is not from Wales. Ice did not deliver the stones. The findings will have huge ramifications in helping to understand Neolithic communities, their connections with one another, and how they transported things across distances. The oldest known wheel in Britain is 3,000 years old. This stunning finding sheds new light on the capabilities and long-range connections of Neolithic inhabitants in what is today Britain. Animals 24-7. The people who built Stonehenge had no writing. They left no records, no plans, no explanations. What they left was the monument itself and the stones they chose to put in it, some of which they carried further than anyone had imagined possible. A human lifetime is 100 years, Clark has reflected. But the altar stone has sat there for thousands of years. The grains within the altar stone have sat there for several orders of magnitude more, 3,000 million years. YouTube. For 3,000 million years, those mineral grains sat in the rocks of northeast Scotland, waiting. 5,000 years ago, someone decided they were worth moving to the other end of Britain. 2 years ago, a team of researchers in Australia figured out where they had come from. And the question of why, the reason that a 6.5-ton block of Scottish sandstone was considered important enough to carry across the full length of a country and place at the very center of the most elaborate monument in the ancient world, remains as open as it has ever been. That is where the science currently stands. The what has been answered. The how is being pieced together. The why is still, after 5,000 years, Stonehenge's secret.